The first thing Dr. Collins noticed when he drove past the rusted iron gates of the abandoned mental hospital in rural Ohio was how quiet the world became. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that presses against your ears like a held breath. The kind that makes you suddenly aware of your own heartbeat, slow and heavy inside your chest. Thump, thump, like it's warning you. And as he parked under the dead security light flickering like a tired eyelid, he whispered to himself with a half-nervous, half-sarcastic exhale that this was just another evaluation, just another patient, just another night. But the shadows around the cracked stone building leaned in like they had opinions about that. The hospital used to be called Briarwood Asylum, back when it housed hundreds of the forgotten, the disturbed, the ones society quietly tucked away and never checked on again. And now only one patient remained inside, one name left on the yellowing registry sheets. No family, no visitors, no discharge date, only a strange note stamped again and again in trembling red ink that simply read, "Laughing patient." And that alone should have made Dr. Collins turn the car around. But curiosity is a quiet addiction, and he had been clean for only 3 days. 3 days since his transfer. 3 days since he'd told himself he wanted real cases, the kind that challenged the mind, not boring suburban anxiety and mild depression. And so he stepped out into the cold night air, coat collar pulled high, breath fogging, flashlight trembling just slightly in his grip. And as he crossed the gravel lot, the wind whispered through skeletal trees like it was trying to call his name in a language he almost remembered. Inside the lobby, the smell hit him first. Old antiseptic, mildew, rust, and something faintly sweet beneath it, like decay trying to hide behind perfume. His footsteps echoed too loudly and then too softly, as if the building itself was learning his rhythm. And on the far wall just beyond the reception desk, he saw the message carved deep into the flaking plaster, the letters jagged and uneven, like they'd been scratched with fingernails instead of tools. "When he laughs, you will run." Dr. Collins felt a chill crawl up his spine and settle at the base of his skull like cold fingers testing the lock. He let out a dry little laugh of his own, the kind you use to convince yourself you're still in control, and muttered that patients love melodrama, even the imaginary ones. And yet something in his chest tightened like it didn't quite believe that joke. The hallways beyond stretched long and crooked, doors hanging open like broken teeth. And as he walked deeper, the darkness thickened into something almost liquid, swallowing the beam of his flashlight before it could travel very far. The files said the patient had been alone in the East Wing for 7 years, fed by automated systems, observed only by cameras that no longer transmitted anything but static. When Dr. Collins finally reached the last reinforced door at the end of the corridor, he paused, listening. At first there was only his breathing and the faint buzz of old wiring in the walls. And then, very gently, almost playfully, he heard it. Laughter. Soft at first, distant and hollow, like it was bouncing through water. A laugh that belonged to no healthy human throat, and yet somehow it was rhythmic, controlled, repeating in slow, broken loops like a nightmare caught on rewind. His hand hovered over the heavy latch, and he felt something dangerously close to excitement bloom behind his fear, the way it always did when he stood on the edge of the unknown. When he opened the door, the room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb swaying slowly, casting long, writhing shadows against the padded walls. And in the center of the room, on a steel-framed bed, sat the patient, restrained but upright, head tilted, body thin and still. The patient's mouth was stitched completely shut with thick black thread, looping through pale skin in rough, brutal patterns. And yet the laughter continued, loud now, vibrating through the room, shaking the bed frame, rattling the loose screws in the walls. And Dr. Collins felt his stomach drop as his brain struggled to reconcile what his eyes saw with what his ears heard. The sound wasn't coming from the mouth, it was deeper, fuller, like it was echoing from inside the chest itself, from lungs that should not have been able to shape such sound without lips or teeth or tongue. The patient's eyes slowly lifted and locked onto his, wide, wet, reflecting the swinging light like two broken mirrors. And through the stitched flesh, the laughter grew sharper, wetter, almost gurgling. Dr. Collins forced himself to speak, introducing himself in the calm, professional tone he'd mastered over a decade of fear and fiction. But the patient only tilted his head further, as if listening to a song only he could hear. The chart said the man had arrived years ago after being found laughing in the middle of a highway at 3 in the morning, blood on his hands that was later proven not to be his own. No memory, no name, only laughter that never stopped. They stitched his mouth after he bit through guards, doctors, even his own tongue, but the laughter had never left. At night it traveled through the asylum like a living thing, crawling through vents, slipping beneath doors, nesting in dreams. Entire staff had quit claiming they could hear it breathing beside them in bed, even miles away. Dr. Collins took a slow step closer, every instinct screaming that this was a terrible idea. And as he did, the patient suddenly went quiet. The silence snapped through the room so fast it made his ears ring. The stitched lips twitched once, twice, like something was testing the seams from the inside. And very softly, impossibly, the patient whispered from somewhere behind the sewn flesh, "You're already running, doctor." Dr. Collins stumbled back, heart slamming. The light above flickered wildly as the laughter exploded back into the room louder than before, so loud it felt like hands grabbing the inside of his skull, squeezing, rocking his thoughts. He fled the room on shaking legs, slamming the door, locking it with trembling fingers as the sound chased him down the corridor, bouncing off walls, leaking through cracks, following the rhythm of his breath all the way to his car. That night he didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again. Not in his ears, but behind them, inside the soft, dark folds of his mind. The laughter slid into his dreams, curled around his breath while he tried to hide beneath sheets that suddenly seemed thin as paper. And over the next days, it followed him everywhere. In the hum of his shower, in the tick of his dashboard, in the low static between radio stations. He stopped answering calls, stopped leaving lights off, stopped trusting silence because silence was where it grew the loudest. And one evening, as he leaned over his bathroom sink, splashing water on his face, trying to wash the sound away, he looked up into the mirror and saw fresh black thread pressed gently against the corner of his own mouth. Not piercing yet, just resting there like a kind suggestion. And from deep inside his chest, where laughter should never live, something began to stir. By the third night, Dr. Collins began to realize the laughter was no longer just following him through sound, but through thought itself, slipping into the quiet gaps between his sentences, riding the spaces between blinks. And he tried to tell himself this was stress, delayed shock, the mind's lazy habit of replaying trauma when it gets bored of peace. And yet the mirror kept disagreeing with him in small, cruel ways. The black thread at the corner of his mouth was still there every evening, never closer, never farther, always waiting like a patient hand on a doorbell. He tried cutting it once just to prove he could, and the scissors snapped clean through nothing at all, while the thread remained untouched as if it belonged to the glass and not to him. He stopped sleeping in his bedroom and drifted instead between the couch and the floor like someone afraid of choosing the wrong coordinate in the dark. And every time he closed his eyes, the hospital returned not as memory but as invitation, the smell of rust and antiseptic sliding into his lungs, the padded walls breathing, the laughter echoing just far enough away to make him chase it. And during the day, he drove past Briarwood without meaning to more than once, his hands turning the wheel as if the asphalt knew where it wanted him. And the place looked different in daylight in a way that felt dishonest. Vines crawling lazily up dead brick, broken windows reflecting harmless clouds, the warning carved into the wall now hidden behind a sheet of plywood like a secret ashamed of itself. He told himself he was checking the perimeter, talking like a man with a plane, while acting like a moth learning the alphabet of fire. The staff records he dug up from old archives during the afternoons were thin, barely more than whispers on paper. Nurses requesting transfers after reporting shared dreams. Maintenance workers quitting after hearing laughter inside locked crawl spaces. One security guard found in his car outside the East Wing with his ears bleeding, but his face smiling wider than it ever had in life. No official cause, always exhaustion, always stress, always coincidence wearing a lab coat. And the patient himself drifted through the files like a shadow without edges. No fingerprints on record. No DNA match, no childhood, arriving one night already fully formed like something that decided to be human for a while and filled out the paperwork poorly. And still every report agreed on one detail. No matter the year or the witness, the laughter never changed, never aged, never cracked, as if time itself wasn't allowed to touch that sound. Dr. Collins tried returning just once more in daylight, hoping the sun might behave like a witness, and keep the madness honest. And inside the East Wing, the air felt thicker, as if the building had developed a slow fever since their last meeting. The bulb outside the patient's room no longer swayed, but remained perfectly still, and he stood there with his hand hovering over the latch again, realizing with a dull shock that his pulse had begun to sync with the faint rhythm of distant laughter even before he heard it. When he opened the door, the patient sat exactly as before. Same posture, same tilt of the head, same attentive waiting, the stitches clean and unbroken. The laughter softer now, like it was being courteous. And for a long moment, they simply watched each other, as if two people unsure who should speak first at a funeral. Neither remembered planning. Dr. Collins finally asked why. Not why he laughed, but why he stayed, as if the answer to that somehow included both. And the sound slipped through the room like warm breath across glass as the patient leaned forward. Just enough for the restraints to creak. And from behind the sewn lips came the faintest suggestion of words shaped in pressure instead of sound. "Because you keep listening, doctor." And the way it said listening made his scalp tighten. That was the moment he noticed their breathing had matched without his permission. Slow in, slow out, like the hospital itself had decided on a tempo, and they were both following it like obedient metronomes. He backed away with careful steps, the way you do from animals that pretend they're tame. And as he reached the hallway, the laughter swelled, not in volume but in depth, as if widening inside his chest instead of the room. And over the next days, that depth followed him into conversations where people paused mid-sentence without knowing why, into elevators that stalled for just one unnecessary second, into cups of coffee that developed faint ripples when nothing touched them. He laughed once himself at the wrong moment during a meeting, and the sound that escaped him felt borrowed and wet, and startled him so badly he bit the inside of his cheek, until he tasted blood just to feel something that still belonged to him. The thread in the mirror twitched that night like it approved, and he began to understand with a slow, sinking clarity that whatever lived in Briarwood did not hunt the body first, but the echo of it, the breath, the reflex to answer when something inside the dark decides to speak your language. And somewhere far beyond the boundaries of sleep and waking, the patient was smiling behind the stitches. Not because he was trapped, but because the door had finally learned how to open itself. By the end of the week, Dr. Collins stopped pretending the laughter was an outside thing, an auditory trick, a haunted memory he could outrun with caffeine and denial, because it had begun to answer him in the quietest ways. Not with sound, but with timing, with coincidence lined up so neatly it felt intentional. Every time he thought about turning back to Briarwood, a radio host somewhere laughed mid-sentence. Every time he told himself he was losing control, a stranger coughed behind him in a way that sounded almost like approval. And at night, the thread in the mirror no longer waited politely at the corner of his mouth, but traced slow, invisible lines along his lips, as if mapping a future it already remembered. He tried to drown it out with motion and drove without direction until the city thinned into highway, and the highway thinned into forest. A stretch of road where the trees leaned close enough to gossip over the asphalt, and the dark felt padded and soft like the inside of that room. His headlights caught a flickering motel sign, just as his eyelids grew heavy, vacancy blinking with a tired, stubborn hope. And he told himself he only needed one night away from familiar walls, one reset, one place where the air didn't already know his breathing pattern. The clerk barely looked up when he took the key, her smile frozen in the shape of something practiced 1,000 times and forgotten every time. And in the room, the wallpaper peeled in long, tired sighs, and the bed made the slow, patient sound of springs learning weight again. He lay there staring at the ceiling fan's lazy rotation, counting the seconds between each wobble, trying to build distance with numbers. And for a little while, the silence held, not empty, but watchful. Then somewhere between the third and fourth rotation, he heard it not as laughter, but as breath moving through a throat that didn't need a mouth, slow and close. The kind of nearness that doesn't announce itself because it assumes you already agreed. He rolled onto his side and whispered out loud for the first time that it needed to stop, and the whisper came back to him from inside his own chest as a tremble he didn't approve. That was when he began to understand the patient had never been alone in that room, because isolation was the wrong word for what it did. It didn't isolate, it nested. The motel's bathroom mirror showed the thread drawn tighter now, no longer resting but gently indenting his skin as though practicing pressure the way pianists warm up on silent keys. He laughed then, once short and disbelieving, and the sound landed wrong in the air, too resonant, too shared, like it echoed from a second throat just behind his own. He checked out before dawn and drove until the forest broke open into fields soaked in pale morning fog, the kind that hides distance and makes every direction feel incorrect. And all the way back, the laughter stayed quiet, not because it had left, but because it was patient, letting him spend what little belief in escape he had left. When he returned to his apartment, the answering machine blinked with a message he didn't remember recording, his own voice telling himself in a flat, unfamiliar cadence, "Don't forget to breathe when he laughs." The words hit him with a familiar chill, because they matched the warning on Briarwood's wall too perfectly to feel like coincidence's handwriting. He tried to call a colleague then, an old mentor who believed in overdiagnosis and underreaction. But the moment the line connected, the sound on the other end was just static, shaped uncannily like distant amusement. He slammed the phone down and pressed both hands to his face, as if trying to hold himself together through friction alone. And behind his palms, he felt the subtle give of skin where it hadn't given before. The first real puncture of the thread, not painful but intimate, like a secret finally being whispered directly into flesh. That night he dreamed without images, only rhythm. Inhale, exhale, laugh. Inhale, exhale, laugh. The pattern so steady it felt like instruction. And when he woke, he found his jaw aching, not from strain, but from rehearsal. His reflections smiled wider than he meant to, and somewhere far away in the east wing of a dead hospital, a stitched mouth leaned toward a camera that no longer watched, and laughed a little softer because the distance between them had begun to behave like suggestion instead of space dot. By the time the sun dipped low on the 9th day, Dr. Collins no longer measured time in hours, but in how long he could go without hearing the echo of himself answering back. His movements had grown careful in the way people become careful around wild animals they secretly believed were once human. Every word he spoke now carried a second shadow just behind it, and sometimes when he caught his reflection in passing glass, he saw his lips shape something a fraction of a second before he decided to speak, as if intention itself had been demoted. He tried once to laugh on purpose just to prove he still owned it, and the sound that came out shuddered halfway through and finished somewhere behind his sternum with a tone that wasn't his. That was the moment he realized the thing in Briarwood had never needed legs to follow him, because he had been building it a body this whole time, one breath at a time. He found himself driving back toward the highway without remembering the choice to go. The fields darkening into long black water under the weight of clouds. Every mile marker slipping past like a countdown. Nobody agreed to, but everyone obeyed. And as Briarwood's broken silhouette rose out of the trees again, he felt no fear at all, only a steady gravitational pull, like the building remembered his weight and had been saving a place for it. Inside the east wing, the air tasted sweet again, and the laughter waited quiet and coiled the way storms do. When they decide to behave until you step outside, the door to the patient's room stood open for the first time, and he understood without being told that nothing inside was restrained anymore. The bed was empty, but still warm, as if a shadow had only just stood up from it. And when he spoke the patient's name out loud for the first time, he heard the answer rising inside his own ribcage before it ever reached his ears. Step by step, the sound climbed him from the inside out, threading through breath, tightening behind teeth. And as he reached the center of the room, the stitches finally began to open, not on the other man's face, but on his own. Painless, precise, each tiny separation like a lock clicking into the correct position. He tried to scream, and laughter poured out instead, in a single, unbroken ribbon that folded the room into itself and made the walls ripple like disturbed water. Memories that were not his slid across his vision in fast, polite flashes. Highways at 3 in the morning, lit by passing headlights, hands slick with blood that never felt like guilt. Doctors leaning in too close ears, too eager for meaning. The first time the mouth had been sewn shut, not for containment, but for preservation. All of it pressed gently into him, the way instructions press into wet cement. And somewhere behind the storm of sound, the old patient finally stood where he could not be seen anymore, because there was no longer any distance left to display. The camera in the corner crackled to life for the first time in years, showing only Dr. Collins in the center of the room, laughing so hard his lungs shook, and his resewn lips glistened black with thread that now belonged fully to him. The sound traveled the way it always had, through vents and underdoors, and into the soft machinery of sleeping towns. And along the highway that night, drivers slowed without knowing why, as radios filled briefly with inexplicable amusement and pedestrians paused mid-step with smiles they could not remember choosing. And inside the ruined hospital, something that had waited a very long time finally stretched comfortably inside a body that still believed it was a man. In the weeks that followed, the town learned to live with small changes it never formally agreed to. The kind that slip into routine so quietly they feel like habits you were born with. People smiled a little longer at nothing. Laughter drifted out of houses at strange hours and ended too abruptly as if someone had covered a mouth from the inside. And somewhere among them, Dr. Collins moved gently through grocery aisles and gas stations and quiet sidewalks with a face that still passed for human most days. If you didn't look too closely at the corners of his lips, where the skin always seemed faintly tender and newly healed. He took a job at a walk-in clinic and listened patiently to ordinary worries with a calm that felt generous and borrowed at the same time. And sometimes when a nervous patient laughed without meaning to, he would feel the echo rise in him like a reflex being tapped with a hidden hammer. At night he returned not to Briarwood, but to sleep that felt like standing in a warm, shallow tide where sound moved instead of water. And from within that tide, the old laughter stretched and tested the world through him, the way a hand tested temperature before committing the rest of the body. The hospital itself was finally boarded and scheduled for demolition after a group of teenagers uploaded a grainy clip of a man laughing alone in the East Wing at 3 a.m. Even though the building had been sealed for years, the comments argued about filters and hoaxes and mental illness, the way people always do when they sense a truth they can't use. The demolition crew reported nothing but dust and rats in one wall where the old warning had been carved so many times it looked baked into the concrete itself. And when the bulldozers finally brought the place down, the sound of collapsing stone rolled through the county like distant thunder that made people pause in conversations they couldn't remember starting. That night, Dr. Collins stood at his bathroom mirror as he had so many times before and traced the line of his mouth with careful fingers, as if checking a seam on a well-worn suit. And he realized with a gentle, unfamiliar clarity that the patient had never been the origin of anything, only the first shape it learned how to wear. The real door had always been the habit of listening, the reflex to answer when something inside the darkness speaks in a voice that sounds almost like your own. And as he turned off the light and lay back into the slow breathing of the room, he felt the laughter settle not as a command anymore, but as a companion that had finally found a place to rest, quiet for now, waiting for the next moment of invitation that always comes disguised as coincidence. And somewhere between the last sound of your own breath tonight and the first thin thought of your dreams, if you happen to hear a laugh that feels one step too close, too personal, too well-timed to be random, will you tell yourself it's only your mind filling the silence? Or will you finally admit that something might be listening right back to you?